Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I thought I would finally get round to doing a video that I thought about doing ages ago and then just never actually got around to doing it, and that is just talking about some of my favourite or interesting non-fiction books that I've read. I don't read a lot of non-fiction. I think like most people who like to read, I probably go for fiction, novels, books more than non-fiction, but I kind of thought that was why it was a good idea to discuss the non-fiction books, because I have read some that I've really enjoyed, and I thought it was like maybe a good idea to share it, and I would like to read more non-fiction books because I do find them really interesting, but then obviously you also get some boring ones or badly written ones, and then that kind of puts you off in a way that I don't think it does when you read a bad novel or a bad fiction book. You just think, oh, that was a rubbish book, and then move on to something else. But I think we're kind of more turned off non-fiction than fiction. Anyway, I've just got 6 books, rambly intro, that I thought I would share. So starting with this, which is Timekeepers by Simon Garfield, and I really enjoyed this book. So it's about time, basically, the subject of time and understanding it, but also our obsession with time, how it I was going to say controls our society, but how our obsession with measuring time, calculating time, running to a certain time scale or to a certain schedule affects how we live in our society. So he says it's about our obsession with time and our desire to measure it, control it, sell it, film it, perform it, immortalise it and make it meaningful. So what I really liked about this book, as well as I thought the subject matter was quite interesting, is that there is a great breadth of subject. There's a lot of different topics that he covers. So he talks about music and records and how they were a certain length in order to fit onto like an LP, and how that's changed and how that changed our making of music and our appreciation of music, and obviously how the technology has then subsequently changed. He talks about museums and they're kind of immortalising the past and recording history. He talks about people like Roger Bannister, who ran a 4-minute mile or a sub 4-minute mile, and then his whole life was kind of frozen in that moment or in those 4 minutes, and what that's like for him. He looks at watches and watchmakers and incredibly expensive fancy watches that they make in Switzerland mostly, calendars, anything really that could be in any way related to time and measuring the passage of time. And I just thought that was really interesting because it covered so many topics, and it's not actually that long of a book. It's about 320 pages. So I thought this was really interesting. So that's Timekeepers by Simon Garfield, and I like the cover as well. So these are in no particular order. So the next one is kind of quite different. So This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, who was a doctor with the NHS in the UK, an obstetrics doctor. This was quite an interesting one to read when I had just found out that I was pregnant, and now thinking about it when I am in like my 3rd trimester. I'm currently on my birth ball, that's why I'm rocking back and forth a bit. So this is, I wouldn't say it's the best written book ever, because it's not really like a book. It is a collection of his diaries and thoughts that he recorded during his time when he was working as a doctor within the NHS. He subsequently left the profession. Basically the stress, the hours, the effects on his personal relationships, and also a very difficult and upsetting incident that happened where a patient, I think, ended up in a coma. It wasn't really like he'd done anything wrong, but it obviously had a profound effect on him. So this is just like lots of stuff about how difficult it is basically to be a doctor in the NHS, about the stress levels, about the hours they're having to work, about the lack of support that they get, the lack of training that they get, which is kind of terrifying, about, you know, if you call in sick, you can't just call in sick, you have to find someone to cover your shift, and then you're basically swapping a shift with them, so you're not really getting any sick time off. If you book a holiday, your holiday can then be cancelled because you get called in to go back to work halfway through the holiday. Missing lots of birthdays, Christmases, etc. to work. And then also just a lot of other stuff about the actual job itself and the kind of procedures and things that he was doing as an obstetrics doctor, some of which I don't really want to think about now that I'm actually going to have a baby. I just thought it's particularly interesting now that we're in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. We're still in lockdown. I'm filming this in the middle of June, probably not going to post it for a little bit because I'm scheduling a lot of posts out, and we're all clapping and cheering for the NHS, but the NHS has been struggling for a really long time through lack of support, funding, privatisation, the doctors just not getting enough support, training, working very long hours and stuff, and now obviously they've got this extra burden of COVID-19, but it was already a really difficult job, and I just think that instead of just clapping and cheering, perhaps reading something like this so that you have a much better understanding of what they actually were going through might be helpful for people. Like I said, it's a bit weird to read it when you're pregnant, so maybe don't if you're about to have a baby. But yeah, that's my next one, second one. So the third book is Flâneuse. I think that's how you pronounce it. It does have like a little pronunciation bit on the back. Flâneuse by Laura Elkin. So I was bought this by my dad's girlfriend a couple of years ago for Christmas. And flâneuse is the feminine form of flâneur, which is an idler, and it says it on the back, an idler, a dawdler, observer, usually found in cities. So the main point is that there is a masculine French word for someone who, a man who walks, basically, walks around the city observing, and that's acceptable, but there's a lack of a female version because women that walked around the cities were basically considered to be prostitutes or something. So, you know, it's basically like a kind of a memoir for her and her living in Paris, a city that she really loved, and she talks about how she really loves to discover cities by just walking around them, and you know, that kind of historic idea of it not really being acceptable or appropriate for a woman to walk by herself around a city still kind of remains to a certain extent. But it also just has some of her own personal experiences, the other places that she lived. So she lived in New York, Tokyo, Venice and London. Although I don't remember much about Venice. It was a while ago that I read this book, to be totally fair. But yes, she also refers to other authors, and I don't know, I just found it quite interesting. So yeah, Flâneuse, I recommend. And then another time book. This is Time Traveller History by James Glick. I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm sorry. So I thought this was going to be a book about how time travel is portrayed in popular fiction. He does refer to H.G. Wells as the time machine on the blurb, and also in the book a lot as this being when the idea of time travel first became a big thing in popular culture. And he also refers to other books and films, a lot of books and like short stories that sound really interesting but probably nobody has read, or very few people have read. And then there's also a lot of references to the science behind time and like physics, and like I'm sure really interesting concepts about physics and particles and things that have a relationship to time or understanding of time or time travel, but it does make it quite inaccessible to a certain extent at times, and it wasn't quite the book that I thought it was going to be, just based on the blurb. I think the blurb is a little bit misleading. That being said, I still think it's really interesting. He's talking about time travel, and he first has to try and define what time is, which when you start to think about it is quite a difficult thing to pin down. And then the idea of time travel and how, you know, even way before H.G. Wells, how people have been interested and curious in the concept of time and moving through time and our understanding of time and time travel. So I did find it interesting. I just don't think it's like entirely accessible all the way through. I would, you know, if I was going to pick between the two, I would recommend this one as being more accessible than this one. But if you do have an interest in time travel, and you like science and popular culture references, then, you know, again, it's not very long, so that helps. So the next one is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. So Henrietta Lacks was a poor black woman who died of a very aggressive form of cervical cancer. Her cells, her cancer cells, were taken from the cancer growth when they were trying to treat her, and unbeknownst to her, they were taken, and they were used by scientists then. So this is, when was she around? So the 50s, 60s. What's quite nice about this book is it does move backwards and forwards in time. It isn't just a chronological description of her life, which, while seems like a really obvious thing to do if you're talking about you're doing like a story about a person, actually ends up not really being that meaningful. This does move back and forwards, but to keep you on track, it does have like a little timeline at the top of every page or every chapter heading, which then helps you kind of position where you are in the timeline. So yeah, sort of in the 50s, 60s, she had the cancer and she died. Oh yeah, it says she died in 51, sorry, so it was 1951. So the cells were removed, and they were used by scientists at the time and even today to be able to do research, because a lot of the research that they do with cells is very difficult to keep cells alive outside of the body, but her cells, these cancer cells, because the cancer was so aggressive, they actually survived. So they're able to use those cancer cells to then grow cultures of other cells, if that makes any sense. So there is obviously science references and medical references in the book, but it is a lot more about her life. So the themes that crop up are, she was a poor black woman from a poor black family. Her family now are still not very well off, and a lot of them have serious health problems, and they feel aggrieved, angry, upset, violated, that their mother's cells were taken without their consent, without her consent, without any of their knowledge. It was perfectly legal at the time. She does talk about some of the changes that have happened in terms of other studies and things that were done around that time or subsequently to patients, where things were happening without their knowledge, without them agreeing, like signing any forms or anything, without them having informed consent. Things have definitely changed, but the question kind of remains whether or not it's ethical, whether or not it was ethical or it remains ethical to remove her cells without her knowledge or her permission, and whether or not that's acceptable. It also brings in some of the ideas of being a poor black person in the US in the 50s, and also today, or in the, probably more in the 90s. And which is interesting at the moment with the, again, I'm filming this in the middle of June, so there's a lot of Black Lives Matter protests happening obviously in the US in a big way, but also in the UK and in other countries, I think, as well. And black people have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Their death rates are a lot higher, and they're being affected economically as well by the shutdown, and they tend more to be in the lower paid frontline jobs, from what I gather. So the problem hasn't really gone away, that they have oftentimes a lot of health problems that they don't have access to healthcare for, particularly in the US. And so, like, what her son goes into surgery for a triple heart bypass, I think, and he's told by the doctor before he goes into surgery that his mother saved countless lives, because the research that they were able to do from her cells, you know, it has been incredibly beneficial in terms of researching other conditions, and it has indirectly then led to lots of lives being saved. So before he goes into the anaesthetic, the doctor tells him that his mother's cells saved, and, you know, lots and lots of people's lives. He goes in for the triple heart bypass and then comes out and has $300,000 of medical debt following the operation, something like that. So it's not then surprising that they don't necessarily appreciate the way that their mother's body was used without permission, without knowledge, without informed consent, and then they're not really seeing the benefits. There's like a long-standing belief, I think, that they think the scientists were all getting rich from using her cells, which it wasn't really the case. But there's just like a lot of distrust and lack of clear communication. I'm kind of rambling, so I'm not really doing this book justice, I'm sorry. But it's just a really interesting story. Again, something that probably people don't know that much about, Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cells. My boyfriend bought it for me because he works with HeLa cells, like a lot of scientists still do. So it's just a really well written book. I think that's the other thing, is like it's a really well written non-fiction book. Like I said, it doesn't just go chronologically through her life, it actually kind of divides things up a little bit more into themes, and it covers some interesting topics, so as well as the science and then the ethics of consent. It also covers kind of race relations, access to healthcare, stuff like that. So yes, I am rambling, but The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is a very good book. And then my last book is Gloria Steinem, My Life on the Road, which I think was also bought for me by my dead girlfriend, who bought me the Flaneurs book. I didn't really know much about Gloria Steinem, never read any of her stuff, but this is, again, it's like kind of a memoir of her and her travels, travelling around, her kind of love of talking to people, I guess. There's a lot of times where she has like interesting conversations with taxi drivers and things, which is interesting for me because that sounds like a horrible experience. I would never want to talk to anyone ever. So it's she just sounds like a really like cool, interesting person, and I just really liked the book. Like, not much happens, I suppose, but it's just about her campaigning, her getting into politics, her travelling around and talking to people, and yeah, I don't know, it's again been a while since I read the book, so sorry if I can't give you any kind of specifics. What I thought was quite interesting was the picture on the cover. She's obviously looking quite young there. There is a picture of her on the back, still looking like amazing, really, even though I think she's in like her 70s or something now. You can't see the picture, but I just thought it was interesting that they chose to put like the young picture on the front. But yes, it's she just seems really cool, and I would like to invite her around like for a dinner party or something. Anyway, Gloria Steinem, My Life on the Road. So that was my very rambly description of several non-fiction books that I have enjoyed. I'm sorry if it didn't make any sense and I didn't really do the books justice, but there we go. If you have read any of them and you've liked them, please leave a comment letting me know. If you know any of the top top non-fiction books that I should try, and please leave a comment below. Although my reading at the moment has been really appalling, like I just can't sit down and read. But I could add the books onto my list. If you've liked the video, please give it a like, and to see more, please subscribe.